Welcome to the Midlife Midsters podcast, your podcast for inspiration on being bold and saying yes to making the most of midlife.
This is a really, talking about emotional fitness is so personal. And so I think what was happening was we were just being personal, but not sort of starting it as a show. And really feeling organic and not having a particular topic that we needed to start on, but more how we were reflecting on what emotional fitness means to us and what we thought about in the last few days as we were preparing to have this conversation.
I think this discussion is so important, and I loved having Angie here because she came from it in a very planned way, helping people organize it in a way that I hadn't really thought about before. And Marla, in our discussion prior to taping, you were talking about your emotional fitness and you're in a better place than you thought you were in thinking about this discussion. And I feel when I think about emotional fitness and look at the wheel, she didn't name them all, or the 3 pillars of emotional fitness, which we can talk about as well, I feel I'm in a good place as well. But as we enter this discussion, I'm not so naive to think that everybody is entering or has the tools to start their emotional fitness journey all in the same place. I've been very privileged that I have financial security. I have a roof over my head. I don't have to worry about food. I don't have to worry about my children being able to get educated and all of that. So as we discuss about emotional fitness, I think we should be mindful that some of our listeners might actually not be in the same place we are, and they're just trying to get those Maslow's hierarchy of needs to be able to start their journey in their emotional fitness and flexing that muscle of that.
So I love that you shared that, and I do think it's really important to think about what we have and what resources we have, particularly with one of those pillars can be therapy, right? Which can be expensive and time consuming. But I also was thinking that there are other aspects in those areas of emotional fitness. Maybe it's resilience, right?
True.
We talked a little bit about, so no matter where you are or who you are, if you can find a friend, if you can find somebody who you can talk to, share your thoughts, share your worries, share your concerns, that is an element of building that emotional fitness. And so I think your point about looking at what different tools we have, we all have something, right? We may have to look in a different direction than we might have otherwise thought.
You know, on that point that you're talking about resilience and finding friends, when I was reading about emotional fitness and what might take somebody down a bunny trail of not being able to be as emotionally fit, one of them was coping with loss. So what you're saying is the resilience, finding a friend, and developing relationships with somebody, whether it's a therapist or a friend. It's a good point, Marla, because coping with loss, I didn't realize that was one of the major things that takes people off the track of their mental health and their emotional fitness, is not being able to deal with that or be resilient.
I mean, what does it mean to handle things, right? Like sometimes stressors come in that we can handle pretty gracefully, and we can sort of, I'm not going to say glide over them, but we, consciously address them, and we rely on our inner resources, and we get through them without too much disruption. Other times, it can be a truly unsettling, difficult, long-term, emotionally trying experience. It doesn't mean you're not emotionally fit. It just means that, fitness is a kind of a relative term. It's kind of situational dependent.
Well, and pain is pain.
And pain is pain.
And that is hard to get through. I mean, sometimes you do have to just sit in it. Mm-hmm. It's about the resilience, I think. But
I think
it is a struggle.
For me, emotional health, mm-hmm. and I think resilience definitely is one way.
It's one piece. Right.
And it's also one perspective, and it's fun
Correct.
to have different perspectives. So and this is kind of something we talk about a lot, right? Like we're not a one size fits all kind of thing. Like each of us is different And I hope we're trying to teach people to look at things differently and find what works for them.
Right.
I have always thought of emotional fitness, not so much as resilience, but awareness.
Okay.
So even when I feel like I don't have the resilience and I just don't want to get out of bed and I'm just feeling miserable, if I'm aware that I'm feeling bad and I'm feeling bad because of this other thing and not because I'm a terrible person, not because everybody's mean to me, not because of anything other than this is a difficult time, then I think that's actually emotionally fit.
It's sitting in it.
Right.
Yeah. It is sitting in it. Yeah.
So the article that I found talked about emotionally fit people exhibit 7 traits, which may have been a little bit of what Angie was talking about. So self-awareness, empathy, mindfulness, curiosity, play, resilience, and communication. And think of those as muscles we can strengthen. So you can be, right, like you can be physically fit, but have much greater lower body strength than upper body strength, right? And so I think you can be emotionally fit and then become more fit, right?
Exactly.
As you strengthen your resilience or your communication or your, back to what I was saying about, I don't think I play, but then I'm like, well, actually, yeah.
Yes, you do.
Because what's play? Play is something that I like to do.
Right. That's recreational.
Right. Right.
That's interesting because I think it's not a static situation either. So what is emotionally fit when you're 20 may be different than when you're 40, which may be different than when you're 60. And there was an interesting conversation in my Italian class this week, because you guys know I'm taking these Italian lessons, and there's like 12 people in the class. And one of the guys in the class, he's a retired pilot and very interesting guy. And while we were on break, I don't even know how this came up, but he said something about, yeah, when I was first learning to fly, it was so stressful. I used to just go in the other room and close the door and cry. And I was like, hey, thrown by that, because this is a man who's like an airline pilot talking about how he had to go cry to get his stress out. But also, and I think I've said this in this podcast, I used to do the same thing. Mm-hmm. And so I said to him, oh my God, I used to do the same thing. I used to try a case and then go back to my office and close the door and cry. I don't do that anymore. And one could say I'm more emotionally fit because it doesn't have that disorienting power over me. But then again, at 20 years old or in my 20s, that was fit enough. I had a mechanism for releasing the stress and tension, even though it's kind of a crazy one.
No, I used to watch movies that would make me cry so that I could get that stress out. If I wasn't just going to cry on my own, I knew that, like, if I watched a commercial, an emotional commercial or some sad movie, I was going to be bawling.
Crying is such a great piece of being emotionally fit because, like, that cathartic kind of crying, it just gets so much out that you don't even know you're getting out.
I thinking about my career back, I mean, this is in recent times too, but throughout it all, whenever there's an emergency and I'm having to give diastat or I'm giving rescue breathing or I'm giving CPR, my adrenaline is full blown and I am in that moment and doing what I need to do. But after that moment, when the ambulance is left, I would go into my office, shut the door, and I could not quit crying. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that we all have an aspect of that, and whether it's the hormones from the crisis or, that's triggering it, or if it's us being able to emotionally handle it, accept it, cry over it, and get back on track. I don't know which it is, but it is. I always felt like it was very healthy and cathartic, for sure.
I guess it's like sweating. Right? You exercise, then you sweat, and sweat is that release of
toxins from the body.
And so maybe that crying is that release of all those endorphins that had been built up in you to manage that emergency situation.
That simile there. That's perfect. It's like you're getting rid of the emotional toxins too.
Yeah.
Stress.
Yeah. I feel like over the years I've gotten able to handle more emotionally without it like knocking me down.
Yes.
But when I think about my entire life, I think it's a lot of those healthy habits that are put in place as well, like exercise and eating well And our guest speaker in the episode before this spoke a little bit about that. But I also think as I've gotten older, I anticipate harder things like loss of friends and loss of family. And so I look at preparing myself or being in a good headspace, especially for my children. Like I think about these young adults that I have when they have what they consider a crisis, or even what I might think of a crisis. I find that I really need to be in a place mentally to be able to be available, not only for myself if something comes up, but also those closest that I love that rely on my strength and emotional stability as well. But I did not think that way when I was 20. And the crisis and the emotions that were going up and down are nothing like what I consider like important, or maybe the word's not important, but definitely more substantial, I guess you would say, today.
And I'm actually very aware of that too. And this came up in the conversation with Angie for a minute, but I am conscious of conserving my energy and not giving it all away, because I am going to need it for me. As you get older, different things happen with your health. I mean, Marla, you had a bout of cancer. I mean, right. Things can happen, and like you need to be prepared to take care of you and not have so many people on the payroll, as it were, like that you got to be taken care of. So I've definitely retracted a little bit for that reason. But again, I'm very aware that I'm doing that, which I think is helpful for me and makes it feel good.
You've spoken to me about that. Like there was a situation where it was going to put me in empty to be there for somebody in a larger capacity. I was able to be there in a smaller capacity and still be helpful. But you were the one that was like, look, Marianne, you've got A, B, C, and D right now. You really should think about this. And I appreciated that as a friend. So I know you think that way. And I think that has definitely helped you, but also helped me take that perspective and realize how important it is to keep my tank full.
Yeah. And that's, one of the issues with empathy, right? Mm-hmm. Right. Empathy is one of those traits that I shared, but empathy can totally deplete you, right? And so how do you make sure? Sometimes it's a friend saying to you, okay, that's good. You were there, you were supportive, and now you can move back to yourself. That we don't always see how we might be allowing ourselves to just get drawn in, especially when you're somebody who is naturally empathetic, a caregiver by profession, by personality, by upbringing, where your inclination is to be empathetic and to give of yourself without even realizing what type of toll it might be taking.
Well, we're just on autopilot. Like we're just going all the time and there for everybody, try to be there for ourselves. And it takes that intention. We talked about pause earlier in the season. And it is important to know when you need to be empathetic to a degree, but at some point,
it's okay to say no.
It's okay to say no.
Yeah.
And I think that is also flexing a muscle of emotional fitness. I'm sure it looks different for everybody, because we all have different skill sets. Our gifts to others are very different as well. But being able to do that assessment, that self-assessment and awareness, like you were talking about, is really important. And hopefully from our guest speaker on this subject, listeners can find that self-assessment and kind of find where their strengths and weaknesses are and what they can do to become more emotionally fit, but also, again, to be able to step back and know what's healthy for them.
And to be non-judgmental with yourself about that process. So, and I think that was something that I also took away from the conversation with Angie. Like, I think just because something is on a list of things that you can do to enhance your emotional health, it doesn't mean that you have to do that or that you have to do that in a particular way. It's educating yourself so that you can decide what works for you. Because at the end of the day, I think what actually, again, makes us more emotionally fit is that sense of awareness.
It's a good point.
Right. We started the last episode with you sharing, I think, some pointers that Angie had put out, maybe in a listserv or an email during the pandemic. And I remember that I found something that I still have on a board in my house about focusing on what fuels you, what drains you, who you're reaching out to, how you're taking care of yourself, and are you getting outside? And I think those are all components. You know, we can come up with a wheel, we can come up with 7 traits, we can come up with 25 things you can do to be more emotionally healthy. But at the end of the day, right, what are those variations of these different ideas, right? The 7 ones that I read didn't specifically say self-care, but we all know self-care is critical. But again, what's your definition of self-care? Is it getting a pedicure? Is it going to a spa? Is it taking time for yourself to just sit with your thoughts? Is it reaching out to somebody? Is it reading a book? That it's still that intention of taking care of you.
You know, I think the challenge, I love what you just said, because I think maybe the challenge for our listeners and for ourselves is we should all sit down and come up with our own list of what is our emotional wellness going to be composed of? And then how are we going to live into those items?
We can kind of talk about that just off the cuff of our head, of our mind. We can sit here for a minute. We were talking about articles. I read an article that talked about the 3 pillars of mental wellness, and it kind of encompasses those 7. So the first one is physical and self-care. The second one is relationships. And the third one is vision. And when I think of vision, I don't want to think of anything like, what's my purpose in life? That's just like way too big for me. But one of the things I like to do in thinking about vision, y'all know I try to think very positive, always have positive vibes.
You are very positive.
But the other thing is I like to put things on my calendar to look forward to, because then it's always like there's that carrot of something wonderful happening, you know, in the future. And I even like spending time with friendships, you know, with friends, having coffee. It can be the simplest of things. It doesn't have to be a vacation. It could literally, you're good at this, Marla, scheduling phone calls with your friend, you know, something that you can look forward to. So I like that. My favorite actually is that vision piece. I like that.
I love how you said that, because as you read through them and then you went to vision, and I'm like, oh, darn. Oops, sorry, bang. Oh, darn. I don't have vision. I don't know where I see my life going, except that this year I started to think about planning more. Not every weekend or not necessarily once a month, but I did. You know, I had concerts once a month that I had bought tickets for, or like you said, things to look forward to. Put things on your calendar to be excited about, and then allow yourself to look forward to those things. I think that's great, and I love that that definition of vision.
One thing I will say on that point that you're talking about putting things on your calendar, you not only do it for yourself, you do it for others. So I remember, well, there's many occasions, but one, you went to this museum. You can talk a little bit about it if you want, but you wanted to share that with others, and you actually went back and put, and I had it on my calendar to go back with you. So you find joy in the little things, but you also share that as well. But even like, I know there's been times that you'll bring over a certain bottle of rosé or sparkling champagne. So you put things on like, okay, when I go to Marianne's, I'm bringing A, B, C, and D, and you share that. And that becomes part of my vision too, with wanting to do things like the simplest little things you share. And I love that about you.
Okay, we'll get something on the calendar soon.
So I'm going to have a different play on vision, which is like a literal play.
Is it serious?
No,
good.
But it falls in but it falls in the category of self-care, which is just today before I came over to record tonight. I decided that I was going to spend a little bit of money, which, you know, I have, although there's many ways that little bit of money could be spent, and get myself dedicated reading glasses. Because I had perfect vision until I was like in my 50s. And then since then, it's just been like totally downhill. And these are progressives because I need them for everything. I need distance help. I need close-up help. I need computer help. The problem is the reading part of these progressives is really small. So when I read a book, I'm like this, like trying to keep it in the bottom of the frame.
You could do that without glasses.
Yeah, well, maybe. But actually not really, because my vision is actually quite bad. But so I don't read. And just the other day, I said to my husband, I'm done with this. I want to read. I enjoy reading. I mean, instead I watch like lots of television. I don't want to watch television. I want to read books. So, and I can't get into
Audible. I love Audible.
for me. So I'm going to go buy glasses. And he's like, have at it. So I went today and I got dedicated reading glasses that are, prescription. And that's a small thing, but that is actually going to have a big change for me.
Right.
Because it affects not just this one thing, like I can read more, but it affects like how I will spend my time,
Doing something you enjoy.
Doing something I enjoy, and that, I can learn things. That's why I like reading. You learn so much. But like, it's a little piece of self-care.
Absolutely. And with a big outcome.
With a big outcome. Yep.
The other piece of when talking about those 3 pillars, relationships, that is, I think, as I've gotten older too, I like building, and we're picky. I think we're all like, find people that we can build relationships with. We don't have to have 100 friends, but having close friends that are meaningful to us also helps, because I feel like that's like a security for me. I can't explain it, but I know if I am emotionally challenged in any way or have some type of crisis, I have an incredible support system. And I know what people to go to and how they can help me and what I might need at that point. And it's nice because at our age, we have built that for ourselves, and hopefully everybody has. It doesn't have to just be family. I think friendships are so important.
I do know people that don't have that.
Oh.
And I think that one really important thing everyone can learn is to be a better friend to themselves. Because at the end of the day, you have to like yourself to be able to move through the world with comfort. And there are people that struggle with friendships, quite frankly. It could be a situation where just your living situation, you're living too far away from people to make friends. Or it could just be, have a habit of picking people that don't stick around. And I've unfortunately had friendships fail. And I know that's a really bad feeling. But you can always be your own friend.
It's true.
And I think that's a little bit, Angie talked about that as well, like talking to yourself and spending time with yourself and checking in with yourself and reminding yourself like, hey, you know what? You're actually really likable because I like you, can go a long way when other friendships aren't there.
Changing the narrative in our head. I think that's one of the biggest obstacles in life in general. I mean, women talk about it. Men don't really talk about it. I don't know what goes on in their head the same way, but women talk about the negative talk a lot. That's a good point. And that is a big piece to self-care. It really is. And it's overlooked.
Yeah.
Like that's the first thing people should do for themselves.
I follow a relationship person on Instagram, and one of the main themes, there's a lot, but one of the main ones is just that you can't be in a healthy relationship with a partner if you don't know yourself and love yourself. And so I think, your point about we need to start by being our own best friend is so critical.
And I think forgiving yourself and is important as well. I think people take things that they've done in the past or the way they've lived their life maybe when they were young. So forgiving yourself and moving on, because I think a lot of that probably feeds a bad narrative as well.
Absolutely. And
shame, right?
Shame. And I absolutely, that is so critical because shame is a worthless emotion.
Yeah.
Like to be ashamed of something you've done or of yourself, how does that help you at all? You have to just let go of that.
And we all make mistakes.
And that goes to what, I had said in the earlier episode about accepting that you're human.
Yeah.
Right? Humans are fallible. Big deal. So you're going to fail. Okay. It's actually okay.
So I was cat sitting for the last couple of days for my friend. And I was sharing with my daughter that I was going to be cat sitting. And so she asked why was I going to be cat sitting. And so I explained that my friend was going out of town for a fundraising walk and to spend a couple of days with her daughter, and I was around. I was available. My house is a mile away, and I like cats. I like her cats. I was happy to go do it. So I started explaining, well, I could have given her the name of my dog walker who could cat sit. And my daughter says to me, you don't have to explain why you would be doing this for her. And it's that notion of doing good deeds because, it feels good to do a good deed because the universe does recognize what we put out there and bring it back around to us. So it was just funny to think about, how we do good deeds and those around us know why we do good deeds. And we've instilled that in our children as well.
Right.
It's interesting you say that because when I think also of emotional fitness and just being in the right mind and moving through life the right way, the gratitude, I don't have a gratitude journal, but lots of people have gratitude journals. But I think about gratitude and changing that narrative in our heads or having a positive outlook, looking at the things that we do have and that we're blessed with and that gratitude. And also all of us do a lot of community outreach and work. And I think that's another way to be able to become emotionally fit is giving to others and doing things to make a difference for someone else. Because it does come back. It is rewarding. It is important. It's good work. And anybody can do it. Anybody can do a little something for somebody else. And that goes a long way with emotional fitness, at least for me. And sometimes when you do those things for other people, you might be doing things that you might not do for yourself. I mean, it's a funny story, but I had to help my elderly next door neighbor, and I've helped him with a number of different things over the last few years. And I needed to go over there to turn off the water valve to the refrigerator because he was getting a new refrigerator. So I had to go down into the basement, and then I had to crawl in a crawl space under the floor of the kitchen. Okay, I never would have done that myself. But here he couldn't do that. So of course, what was I going to say? No, I can't crawl down there. Like I could crawl down there. But it felt so good to push myself. And so sometimes as you're doing something for somebody else, you're actually challenging yourself and you're growing, which is also part of those emotional fitness pieces and exercises that are in whatever article you could read. You will come up with some ideas for how we benefit from going outside our comfort zone, doing something for somebody else, taking a risk, taking a chance, trying something new. I think all those things, if you will, like all the themes that we've covered, the topics that we've covered, I think show up in many cases in these different articles about being emotionally fit because we're talking about things that help us grow as people. Personal growth. It's interesting too about just listening to you about emotional fitness. I started thinking, gosh, there's so many components: self-care, exercise, eating healthy, doing for others, community service, relationships. It's complex. It is complex.
Which is why it's important to pick the ones that work for you and not overwhelm yourself.
It's true.
There is one piece for me of emotional wellness that I don't think you're going to find on any list. Maybe food? I did. Well, the food definitely you're going to find on a list.
I like that too.
Dogs.
Aww.
I honestly don't
pet therapy.
I don't think I could live my life without an animal companion. And I say dogs. I happen to have a dog and have had dogs for the last 20 years. Before that, I had cats. I love cats. We had bunny rabbits. I love the bunny rabbits. I just love having an animal there. And it is a little bit, what made me think of it, Marla, is you were talking about you do things for your neighbor, like that push you out of yourself. Being with an animal pushes you out of yourself a little because you can't really communicate with them in a direct and easy way. And yet you want to. And so you tune in, at least I find myself, tuning in to my dog, Phoebe, who I love, with such attention that it's a kind of attention that I don't bring to so many things, And
unconditional love.
It is.
It's a loyal companion.
But it's also like rapt attention in her in the moment to try to understand what it is she's saying when she's barking at me. Usually she's saying she wants food, so she is her mother's daughter, her mother's doctor. But you know, it's that extending yourself outside of your normal boundaries, I guess, is what it is. And it's a great feeling, and it makes you feel powerful. Like, I can do this. I can actually make myself known to a creature that can't speak to me.
Well, in the episode previous as well, Angie was talking about tuning into your senses. So with a pet, you're petting them. I mean, it is tactile. You're right. They're licking on your face.
And they make
and there's something about
noises
it.
And,
yeah.
You know, little grunts. And,
there's a lot of sensory wrapped up in that.
Yeah, it is. It is. Maybe in some future episode.
I think so. What are the tools or traits or components that
of our own
think
personal emotional toolboxes,
and we can add them to the website?
Yeah. And speaking of the website, be sure to check AmericanMidstress.com, and hopefully we'll have some information up there soon about our emotional toolboxes, and maybe you can use them as a jumping off point for your own emotional toolbox.
We've got work to do, girls.